Welcome everyone to the SocialChorus webinar. The theme for today is your internal comm strategy broken. We've got a guest, Jason Anthoine from Audacity, who I'll introduce here in a little bit. But to introduce myself, my name is Chuck Gose. I'm a strategic advisor at SocialChorus, and you're in for a great conversation today. I see strategy as a common theme, a common thread across all communicators. Some do it quite well, but as we all know from our own careers, some maybe not so well. But fortunately, we're joined by a great leader here in the internal comm space today, Jason Anthoine. Jason, welcome to the webinar.
Great, thanks. Glad to be here.
Now, before we get into your content, I do want to take a little time to set the context for those attending. Some in the internal comms world have referred to you and I as the Thelma and Louise of internal communications. And when I say some, it's really just me being a bit of a goof on Twitter and LinkedIn. But you know, it goes to show the power of networking, getting to know people, and building your profile, but also maintaining those connections. Because you and I met years and years and years ago at the very first PRSA Connect in Atlanta, and here we are again. In some ways, it seems like a lifetime later, getting to do this webinar together. So I just wanted to thank you for taking the time to be on here. But before we get into it, I'm curious with your last name. As someone who has a last name that often gets butchered, what is the worst pronunciation of your name ever, Jason?
Well, you know, I get Anthony a lot. I get Anthoine a lot. And there was one situation where I was being introduced as a keynote speaker. And, you know, prior to those things, you send in a bio so they know what to say. And it was clear that this young man had not read the bio. And so he was reading it along until he gets to the very bottom, and he says, it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Jason. And then he just paused, and you could tell he wasn't even going to try, Anthoine. And so he backed up and he said, it's my pleasure to introduce the fabulous Mr. Jason. I got to say, that's probably one of the best introductions I've ever had, mispronounced name or not.
And that young man's name was Chuck Gose. No, I'm just kidding. It was not me that did that at the event. So you are the founder of Audacity. Describe a little bit about what Audacity is, and more importantly, Jason, I'm curious, like, what is your unique passion about the world of specifically internal comms?
So Audacity is, I like to call it a employee communications firm, but I think firm is taking license with that name. It's really myself and a loose confederation of other folks who think similarly in how we should and could do internal comms, employee engagement, and culture change. And I named it Audacity for two reasons. There's a great book called From Good to Great, and part of that book talks about organizations needing big, hairy, audacious goals as part of their strategy and their mission. And so it's been my experience throughout my career that companies are really good at the big part and the hairy part and the goals part. It's the audacious part, I think, that's a little bit lacking. And so when I was coming up with what I wanted to call this so that I had an email address other than Gmail, I ended up on Audacity, which also happened to be something that somebody said to me when I left my last corporate job was, you sure to have a lot of audacity to go out and do this by yourself. And I thought, you know what, I think the signs are aligning that this ought to be the name for this organization.
Well, the audacious Jason, we're going to get started here in the webinar. Just to let you know, just to keep you on your toes, I've completely randomized the slides. After this,
okay, great.
You may not know what's coming up next.
Well, I used to be a DJ.
To this.
I used to be a DJ in my former life, so if we want to do a dance mix, I'm perfectly capable of doing that in random order.
and then also, you recently wrote, and I'll call this out for anybody in the webinar listening now or later. Go check out a very recent LinkedIn post that Jason wrote about calling out BS at work and some of his own experiences about calling out BS as a communicator that you see at work. So, Jason, I will have my BS meter on. So if I hear you calling out any BS during this time, I will be encouraged by your own words to call you out on it. But some other key notes here coming up just from a housekeeping standpoint. Obviously, if you're hearing us right now, you are streaming, you're listening to it, you're doing the right thing. If you're not hearing anything, there is no dial-in number. So you've done something wrong. Log in through the presentation platform here so you can hear Jason's advice. Also, submit your questions through the Q&A widget on your screen. I will be looking at those as they come in. If there's something I can call out at the time that Jason's talking about it, we will certainly do that to make sure that all of you do have access to those questions. And then another key note here, this will be available after the fact. So if you've taken notes or want to go back and rewatch it, anybody that's signed up will have access to the video recording of this webinar. So as the Thelma and Louise of the internal comms world, Jason, I am handing the keys over to you, and let's get started.
Great. So I'll take the Louise name if that's all right with you.
I'm good with it.
Good. Fantastic. So what we're talking about today is whether or not you think your internal comms strategy is broken. We talked a little bit about Audacity and sort of what we're focused on. Our tagline is bold thinking at work. Our whole mantra is around helping you think more boldly about the types of internal comms strategies and tactics and counsel and advice that you're giving and receiving internally. So we're going to focus our efforts today around your comms strategy and what's working and what's not working, and giving you some tools and tips for how to look at that perhaps a little bit differently. Just one more thing on Audacity. We talked the fact that our main goal is to transform workforces from tired and bored to inspired and on board. And that's really, what all of us do in our roles is help people really care about where they work and to help work really care about the people who work there. And so I like to think that we do that by helping to drive culture change, enhancing communications, and I think most importantly, igniting the courage to do both. That's why I've chosen this great young aviator here who is looking forward, looking upward, looking to the future. He's kind of exemplifies courage to me, and that's something that I think that we all need more of, particularly as we wrestle with our cultures, our brands, our leadership teams, and the things that we can do to, improve employee experience, so that's improving our customer experience. So you'll hear a lot about the word courage today as we talk about the types of things that we do from an internal comms perspective.
And Jason, I just wanted to let you know on that previous slide, anytime I see the word transform, my BS meter starts to wiggle a little bit.
That's a good good one to call out. Exactly right there.
So do you believe, and I'm not saying that it can't happen, but you believe that communicators do have a key role in helping companies transform, and define sort of what you mean by transform or transformation?
So not only do we have a key role, sometimes we have the most key role, because communications, the function, is uniquely positioned in the organization so that it is aware of everything that's going on across the business and across all of the functions. So we may know things that are going on in human resources, and we may know things that are going on, on the operations side of the business. The operations people may not know what's going on in HR and vice versa, but we do. And so we play a unique role in organizations in that we get to sort of see everything that's going on and help the organization kind of connect all of those dots in ways that they just naturally can't do themselves. And part of that is not only flagging things that we think ought to be looked at a little more closely, but helping the organization kind of become who it really aspires to be. And, you can call that transformation, you can call that culture change or change management or whatever the fancy MBA word is it is. But the idea is it's our job to sort of help move the company forward, as well as the leaders and the employees themselves, in a way that it probably can't do on its own. And so because we're uniquely positioned in the comms role, in the comms function, I think it's, not only can we do that, we have an obligation to absolutely do that. It's not just the work of the transformation team or the HR team. that's responsible for making sure companies are becoming who they want to be. It's everyone's role, but it's especially the communicator's role.
Okay, my BS meter's back to 0, Jason, so we're good.
Okay, good. We'll go back to DEFCON 5. All right. So this quote to me, I think, is as inspirational as they come. It's from, President Teddy Roosevelt saying, "Far and away the best prize that life has to offer us is the chance to work hard at work worth doing." I think a lot of us, certainly on this call, but, across the world, all of us work hard. But it's the chance to do that hard work for work worth doing, I think, that feels like mission, feels like purpose. It's what makes us get up in the morning and go to the office. I can tell you that, trying to drive earnings per share or margin percentage within a certain market, that's not what gets people up in the morning. It's doing hard work at work worth doing that really drives people. And so this quote really kind of sums up what it is we do and why that's important, because at the end of the day, all of us are doing work that's worth doing. We are responsible for helping to drive the reputation of a brand. We're responsible for helping to drive the culture of the company that offers up that brand. And so that's work worth doing. We are helping employees, whether you've got 50 employees in your company or 500,000 employees in your company. What we are trying to do is make that relationship worthwhile for both the employees and the company, in service to the customer. And that is definitely work worth doing. At the end of the day, we ought to feel like, hey, I moved that needle forward a little bit. I made a difference. I'm helping the company make a difference. And so to me, that's a very important thing to be focused on is how important the work that we are doing is, not just to the company and the employees, but, to our culture and society in general. Which then sort of naturally begs the question, why do we need an internal communications strategy at all? We've been running this comms function for years, and we haven't had a strategy, and we've done pretty good. And that's hard to debate. If you've made progress and you've been able to have success, it is hard to make a real case for why you need a strategy. But if you sit and think about it, it's the same question that your C-suite is asking themselves. What is the strategy for this business? What are we trying to do as an organization? How do we direct all of our efforts in one sort of common direction so that everybody is helping us kind of get to where we need to go? Because if you don't have that strategy, then you may end up going places that you don't want to go or that you don't need to go or might be even detrimental. And so when you don't have a strategy, your day looks like this guy's day, where there's all kind of directives coming from all across the organization of go here, do this, we have to be here by then, here are the directions to follow, let me know when you get there. I don't know how anybody drives a car with those types of multiple GPSs spread all around the dashboard. And so that to me is a perfect illustration of the lack of a strategy. There's plenty of places to go. There's a whole lot of people giving you directions on how to get to those places. But is that even somewhere that we need to be going? Don't we really need sort of one, direction and one strategy to help sort of drive all of that together? So I think I've actually been in this cab before in New York where we weren't quite sure where we were going, but we were making great progress. And so that kind of feels like success. That is not necessarily success. What you want is great progress against, identified strategy that supports what the organization's trying to do. So as you think about your strategy, there's kind of 3 easy questions to ask yourself about whether you have a strategy, and if you do, whether that strategy is working or not. And if you don't have a strategy, here are some, these 3 questions apply to how you ought to maybe think about putting one together. So the first one is my internal comms strategy aligned with the business strategy? And everybody, will say that. But the reality is that it really needs to be a one-to-one correlation between what the business is trying to accomplish and then your communication strategy about how to drive whatever those business goals and objectives are. So, for example, if you work in a retail organization and you have a lot of stores in different locations across the country, and those locations are divided up into regions. And one of the goals for the business is for the Southeast region to have a same-store sale increase of 20% over the next calendar year. Then you need a communications goal that's tied to communicating with those retail employees that helps to drive that same-store sales traffic by 20% for the next calendar year. And so what that does is two things. One, it tells you exactly what it is you need to be doing and how to communicate with those employees so that they are understanding what they need to do to drive sales in that region by 20%, for example. And the second thing is, and this may be even more important, by having a definition of what to do, that means by necessity you are excluding all of the other things that people come to you and ask you to do. So if you don't have a strategy that's tied to your business strategy, then you are subjecting yourself to one-off requests all throughout the year to do a lot of different things that may not be exactly where you need to be spending your limited time and resources. And so when you have that strategy, not only does it tell you where to go, but it also tells you exactly what to say no to. Because there's going to be a million requests. People are going to come to you with all those other little GPS things they want you to stick on your windshield. But if you have one main thing that you're following, it's easy to say, you know, we could do that, but we don't have the resources because they're all tied up around the strategy. If it's important, do you have extra resources? Do you have extra budget? We could consider getting this done another way. Absent that, we're going to stay dedicated to our plan. Chuck, does that ring true with the stuff that you're hearing outside too?
Do you think then it's important to have then senior leadership at a company sort of sign off or give their blessing on the internal comm strategy so that they obviously have to abide by it. They're not going to ask for the one-off, the things that sort of go against the strategy. What sort of buy-off do you think a communicator needs for their overall strategy?
Well, that's a great question. I think that's exactly the type of buy-in that you need. You don't want to just create a strategy and then you and the team sort of have it and follow it. You want that to be, reviewed and approved as high up in the organization as possible for a couple of reasons. One, you've got executive buy-in around your strategy. That's also a defender for you and your team so that when you are getting sort of a pile of one-off requests, you can go and say, hey, we agreed to this strategy. It's tied to the business strategy. We've got these 15 other requests that have come in. I don't know what to do with them. They all have come from senior leaders. It's hard to say no to these guys and gals. What should I do? Now you've got a defender who says, this is the strategy we put together. These are the things we're focused on. If those other things are important, then those other leaders might need to find out different ways to maybe get those things done without taking, the comms team off of what we all agree we should be focused on. So the next area then, once you sort of wrestle with that question and make sure that you've got your internal comm strategy aligned to your business strategy, which, by the way, one thing happens from time to time. So you're sitting there, you're putting together your comm strategy, you're like, oh, it needs to be tied to the business strategy. I need to go get a copy of the business strategy. And you go and ask for a copy of the business strategy. A lot of times you're not going to get a, quote, copy of the business strategy. What you'll get is 4 or 5 different PowerPoint decks that are 150 slides long that show a whole lot of stuff that we're doing as an organization, but you're not going to see a really tight 15, 20, 25-page slide deck that shows the actual strategy and what we're trying to do. That's rare. It's exactly what you need, but it rarely exists. So sometimes the very first thing you have to do if you're trying to align your comm strategy to the business strategy is to take all of those decks and actually make a business strategy. Distill all that information down, run it back through the C-suite and any other leaders who need to be involved. But that's an exercise that usually has to take place first that they have not done. And they are always appreciative when you do that because they have the same struggles you do. They're not just some magical leader sitting somewhere who can just make up stuff all the time. They're running off the same kind of strategy you are. And so to develop a really tight, succinct business strategy from all those different decks is always an appreciated task and responsibility if it doesn't already exist. All right, the second one then, do I have the data to support the strategy and the value that I bring to the table? And I can't stress enough this whole idea around data and the seat at the table that we all want and collectively sort of whine about not having. So if you think about that table, whatever that table means to you, it's typically senior leaders, executives who are sitting around making decisions for the company, and we want to be a part of that, not only to shape and reflect that, but also so that we can react to it and we know exactly the types of things that we need to be focused on. The reality is that everybody else sitting around that table is bringing data to that table. Finance is bringing numbers, HR is bringing numbers, operations, everybody is bringing numbers to that table, and they're using those numbers to back up whatever claim it is that they're making. We have to do the same thing. And so I would say in the last, up until the last year or two, that has been very difficult to do. We are very good at measuring the outputs, how many clicks, how many likes, how many videos, how many people showed up to the town hall. We are very good at measuring those outputs, but it's the outcomes that matter the most. So if we're having town halls, if people are clicking on articles, what kind of change is that happening around engagement or employee experience or whatever other business drivers there are and the data around those that prove that what we're doing really matters. And so if you don't have that data, you got to start digging around and finding that. Sometimes it's in HR, sometimes it's the operations side of the business. But as much as possible, you want all your strategy, tied to the business strategy and have your strategy be backed up by that data. Otherwise, you're just making claims based on your gut, which may be absolutely right, but nobody's going to believe somebody just because they've got a gut feeling. So it's the numbers that make that believable. And then the third area is, am I driving these real business results? At the end of the day, that's what matters most to the C-suite, to shareholders, to employees and customers. Everybody wants the business to be successful. And so, you define your strategy, you have that strategy backed up by the data, and then you're constantly measuring that, either through pulse surveys or annual surveys or other ways to make sure that you are actually driving those real business results. And here's why that matters. So earlier on when we talked about the example of the retail organization who wants to grow the Southeast region by 20%, and then you put together a communications effort that reaches all of those retail employees in that region, you then want to go back and say, all right, at the end of that, were we able to drive sales by 20%, or was it 5%, or was it 30%? Because the retail people, the operations side of the business, will take all the credit for being able to drive that retail sale, but you also have a hand in making that possible. So that is certainly something that you can also take credit for because your targeted communications helped make that possible. And you think that doesn't matter, but it does when you go back to the C-suite and say, hey, we were able to drive sales in the Southeast region by 20% by doing this one thing. If we do that in the other 4 regions, we can also expect similar type results. And it's very hard to ask for additional resources or people or budget or whatever to do those things unless you come to them and say, we said we were going to do this, this is what we did and it worked, and we want to do it somewhere else. And if you're proving those real business results, you are much more likely to get all of the resources that you need to be more successful.
And Jason, I think you make a great point there that often gets overlooked a lot of communicators in the whole outputs, outcomes conversation, that you're right. For a lot of communicators have been focused on outputs, but if you really truly want to take credit for the change, whether it be employee behavior change or culture change, whatever it is, it really are those outcomes that are going to show success. And I think a lot of communicators, for whatever reason, aren't willing to take the credit for being a part of the outcome. They're happy to take credit for the outputs, but for some reason have a problem taking credit or partial credit even for the outcomes that happen in organizations.
Right. I see that a lot in the conversations that I'm having, in that people really are having an impact on the outcomes, but, they're a little bit reticent sometimes about, saying that we participated in helping to make that happen. I don't know exactly the reason behind that. I know a lot of us probably are a little more introverted than maybe our friends in marketing down the hall, and so it makes us a little more reluctant sometimes to take credit for things that we're doing. But it's totally natural, totally normal. That's what everybody else is doing around that table. And, if you've got great results that are really driving the business, you ought to be able to talk about those and use those as a way to, define whatever your new requests are, because what you're doing is building trust. We gave them money to do this. They did it. If we give them more, they can do even more. It makes it easier to ask for, budget increases and additional resources if you're proving the success and, not just cranking out more great content.
And a question came in, Jason, that I want to call out just as we are on a couple topics here.
Great.
Kimberly Reed asked a question here. What suggestions would you give a mid-level comms professional on approaches for showing the value of internal comms in a distributed leadership and communications environment? So it sounds like in a very mid-level role, but where leadership and everybody's sort of spread around. What are some ways or suggestions you have for different ways communicators can truly show the value that internal comms brings?
Right. So let's use an example here. So if you're in a distributed workforce and you have employees and leaders all over, let's pretend, for example, that you're doing, a quarterly town hall or a monthly town hall, and you have executives or local leaders who are conducting that. One way that you can prove the success of that is beyond just how many people attended, but you can do a pulse survey. And it doesn't have to be some fancy new technology. You can just do some man-on-the-street kind of questions as people are filing in. What do you know about our results? What do you know about your role in helping to make those happen? What do you know about, our plans for the next quarter? And just kind of get a sense of whether anybody has any idea about any of that stuff. Let the town hall happen, and then follow up with the same pulse survey with the same questions. And then what you can then show is that, so what we found was before the town hall, nobody had any idea about what our results were, much less what we're trying to do the next quarter or the next 2 quarters. After the town hall, people had real clarity around not only what we did and maybe how we accomplished our goal or missed our goal for this quarter, but also exactly what we need to be doing the next quarter for us to not have that same kind of result that we just had in the previous quarter. So those are easy, quick ways to kind of classify and quantify some results that you're having for the types of things that you're probably already doing all day long. And then now that you've got that data, you can begin to build a dashboard, and I'll show you in a few seconds what one might look like. But you can build a dashboard around these types of things and what you're tracking and how those are tied to business results, so that, you're not constantly crowing about everything you've done, but you're just tracking your success, and let those things kind of speak for themselves. These guys and women are used to looking at these kinds of things all the time, and the more you can make those numbers really pop and tie them to the business results, the more impressive that's going to be, and the more they're going to want exactly what it is you're doing.
And another question came in from Kimberly. Thank you for submitting this, Kimberly. I think you're on this track a little bit, Jason, when you talk about using pulse surveys as part of this. She wants to know, what types of data does a communicator need to support their strategy, especially when not using advanced technology to help produce some measurable outcomes? So
right.
Pulse surveys, I think, is a great example. So is this an area where maybe communicators are overthinking the data that they have accessible, or what kind of data can they create to help support their strategy?
Well, I think, data is being created all over the business every day. And so one example might be your human resources function comes to you and says, hey, we don't have a really good sort of onboarding process. We do a good job of recruiting people, but day one they get here, it kind of, is kind of scattershot. And then we end up losing people maybe 30, 60, 90 days in, and we just spent a whole ton of money to get them here. What can you do to help us sort of, keep our employees once they get here within that 30, 60, 90-day period? So they are tracking turnover within 30, 60, 90 days. They are already tracking that. They know exactly how much each person costs them if they turn over. So that's data that they're already keeping track of. And so you can get that data from them and then say, all right, if it costs $30,000 for every person we lose, and we normally lose them at day 42 on average, what kind of comms plan can I put in place to make sure that day 1 through day 50 feels really good, so that we get them through that day 42 sort of red zone and they end up staying? And then track and see how you're doing. And then if that number goes up or the turnover rate goes down, then you can say, we were able to lower that turnover rate from recent hires at day 42 from 8% down to 3%. And if each one of those costs us $30,000, that's a $300,000 savings in recruiting costs to human resources. That'll get somebody's attention. And it's using data that is already being tracked in the business. So a lot of times, people are like, oh gosh, I know I need to track things. I know I need to have some data, but I don't have the tools to do that. True, I get it. We're always resource strapped. The beauty is a lot of these things are already being tracked across the business. And so those are great questions that you can go and ask others, so that you're looking for data that may already be on somebody's radar.
Okay, we've had a few more questions come in. Thanks for submitting those, and we're going to let Jason get back on track, and then I'll sprinkle them in if something he touches on, or we'll answer them at the end. So Jason, please go ahead.
Okay, great. So, in those 3 questions, I know a lot of times, like, okay, great, but what does that really mean? And how am I exactly going to do this when I hang up the phone? So this next set of slides are some actual templates and some thought starters around exactly how to do this when you hang up the phone. So this first one I like to call sort of the say-do continuum. And long time ago, I attended a conference where they talked about this very theory, and it was Amoco, the energy company at the time, who was showing this. And so this whole concept here is based on a concept they were showing about how people move through this continuum as you ask them to achieve certain goals. So on the right-hand side is this rainbow, and across the bottom it shows how you move people from awareness to understanding to acceptance and then to commitment. And then across the middle of that rainbow are words like inform and clarify and engage and involve, till you finally get to the point where they're committed and are helping you to achieve those strategic goals. The most important thing about this chart, though, are those 2 sort of bar charts. So on the right-hand side is the bar chart that shows all the communications that we're responsible for, whether those are printed, face-to-face, digital, doesn't matter, all of the outputs that we're responsible for. That left-hand bar shows everything else. So it's behaviors, it's how leaders act, it's whether you have an open door policy, it's the experience employees are having. And what this shows is that from a comms perspective, our little bar on the right-hand side only gets you through clarify. If all we did was comms within our organization and we didn't have any behaviors or any other thing going on, we would only get through clarify. We would not help people be able to get to engage and involve, because comms by itself just can't do that. It relies on all the other things that are part of the culture to help make those things even more turbocharged. And so this is a great chart to pull out whenever you're in a meeting and somebody says those fateful words, well, I think what we have here is a communications problem. Well, maybe, but maybe not. We can do all the communications in the world, but if everything on that left-hand bar isn't happening, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. It's a combination of both of those things, where it's the comms as well as the experience and the culture and a lot of sort of non-comm related things that actually get you to where you're going. So this is a great one to pull out when somebody says that, because then you can say, that's not necessarily true, and here's how that works. This next one comes from a guy who's a legend in our business named Roger Dupree. His concept is that from a manager's perspective, employees really only care about 6 things. And if you go around this wheel, he identifies those 6 things. So if you look on 1, 2, and 3, those are the things that I kind of talk about as the me things, M-E, me, my role, my things about me, things that I worry about as an individual. So what are my job responsibilities? what kind of feedback am I getting that? How am I doing? Is anything I'm doing, does it even matter? And then lastly, for number 3, does anybody even care? You know, that speaks to recognition and appreciation and those types of things. But that's not enough. 4, 5, and 6 talk about the we. So once employees kind of have thought about 1, 2, and 3, then they think, oh, well, how is my team doing? And then how are we doing as an organization and where are we heading? And then and only then do they think, well, what can I do to help? And so it's a combination of answering sort of those me questions that employees have. What's my job? How am I doing? Does anybody care if I do it right or wrong? And then answering the we questions around, you know, what is our team doing? Are we making progress against what we said we would do? And then what is it that I and we as a team can do to make this more successful? This is a great little reminder of exactly kind of how to think about your comms, particularly, you know, manager and leader comms as you're putting together comms plans for them. This next one I won't spend a ton of time on, but everybody's like, okay, if we want to put a strategy together, what are the pieces of that? Well, this is a great little thing to remember, drive, D-R-I-V-E. So there's a discovery phase. What is it we need to do? Why do we need to do it? What's all the data that's available? There's a road mapping phase, which is all the strategy and the tactics and schedules and budget and resources, everything that you're putting together. Then there's the implementation phase. It just has the word launch there. We all know it's more complicated than that, but that's the main point around implementation. And then there's 2 parts of measurement. One is verification. So as you're doing it, as you go along, what kind of pulse checks do you have in there to make sure that you're on schedule and on target so that you don't get to the E phase, the evaluation phase, and then you've completely missed. This is a way to kind of check things all along. And then the evaluation phase is more around, you know, what are the outputs? What are the outcomes? How did we do against what we said we were going to do? This is a great little checklist for the kind of things you need to think about as you put together your strategy. This you've probably seen 1,000 times. Everybody has one. This is mine. Basically a communication strategy worksheet. What are the organization goals, the business goals? What are the communication goals that we're trying to accomplish that drive those business goals? What are the messages we need to drive as part of this effort? The objectives for those. Who might be impacted? That's different from audience. Audience is certainly part of it, but there are some people who aren't really the audience, but they may still be impacted. And then what does success look like? And then down at the bottom is where you list your tactics and the channels and the content and, you know, the creative and sort of what the schedule will be. But this is just a quick little worksheet for helping you kind of put together your strategy. And then once you have that strategy, and this is also, this worksheet, by the way, is something that you can get off of the SocialChorus blog. There's a link to this very thing off their blog that is a great resource for you when you hang up and are trying to figure out what to do next. And then once you have that plan, this thing I really love here, I call this sort of a placemat. And so, you know, when you go to a restaurant, there's a placemat there in front of you. These placemats are great to take to especially senior leader meetings because it boils down your entire communication strategy onto one side of basically an 11 by 17 piece of paper. And so on the left-hand side, in the orange and the blue and the sort of pink and the green, those are all the business priorities. So what is the business trying to do? And then that's when we start with a comms plan. So our objectives based on those priorities are these. And then the messaging that we're focused on are these. And the tactics, and then the key dates, and then other sort of expected outcomes that we're looking for. And then along the right-hand side is a snapshot of all the messaging with a thing on the bottom that generally says, here's how we approach any kind of comms, just so they get a better sense of what you're doing as a function. But this particular piece here is incredibly helpful in those meetings where they're like, so how are we doing in comms? And instead of just, you know, spouting out something for 45 minutes, you say, well, as a matter of fact, here's how we're doing. Here's what we're tracking against. You can whip this thing out. And it's a great way to just have an executive view of what all you're doing on a particular initiative or just overall within comms. The other thing that's also helpful and associated with that is this dashboard. This is an example from a friend of mine, Dave Watson, who ran internal comms at the Home Depot. And so this dashboard is from March of 2015, and you can see that what he's put together here, using data that they're already tracking and just sort of presenting it in a new, more visual way, shows how their employee communications, and they call their employee associates, how their associate communications are tracking for March of 2015. So, here are some of the outputs around content, news, articles, how many people have engaged with that, what are the key projects that we're focused on, with some nice charts in the middle that sort of quantify that. Those charts in the middle, though, are really about the outcomes. So those things are tracking how Home Depot is doing against their Great Place to Work initiative. So the outputs are on the left-hand side and somewhat so on the right-hand side. In the middle are the outcomes. So all the stuff we're doing on the left-hand side is affecting whether we are a great place to work or not, and that's shown in the middle. And on the right-hand side are all sort of their channels and technologies for how they reach folks. Combined, these are great little tools to use to help you not only think more strategically about putting your plan together, but then also communicating that to whoever your key stakeholders are, whether that's the rest of your team, senior leaders, other managers throughout the organization. Now you've got a way to quantify all this great stuff you're doing other than saying, yep, we're on target. This is a great way to just kind of show it without feeling like it's too showy. Does that make sense when I say it like that, Chuck?
Yeah, and just a quick observation here on the dashboard. I think when you look at some of the other examples you've shown, and it talks about a strategy and a plan and putting all that together, largely outside of communications, there's very little tolerance for reading a strategy and reading a plan. It's helpful for the communicator, but it's tough to get others to be a part of that. This dashboard, though, this is something that resonates with other parts of the business. So as communicators begin thinking about building credibility and sort of speaking their business's language, this is a dashboard that a manufacturing supervisor or a logistics leader or, as I mentioned, someone in the retail side, operations, they understand dashboards, and they can at a glance very quickly see progress tracking, quick stories, and get a good feel for how successful communications is being.
That's a great point, and I use this myself in my last role as communications leader for Newell Brands. With 40,000 employees and about 110 consumer brands. And so we were getting requests from the CEO to, hey, we need to make sure that we put this town hall video and all the sort of supporting content for it on the intranet site. And I was like, we can put it on the intranet site, but I can guarantee you not a whole lot of people are going to see it there. We need to be pushing this over our mobile app. And he said, well, why is that? Haven't we spent a ton of money on the intranet? And I said, yes, we have a great intranet. It's a fantastic portal to get to other things. And while they're going to get to other things, they're ignoring this great content that we put on there, just sometimes because of the nature of certain types of intranets or the culture or time or whatever the challenge might be. So what we found is that, only 5% of our employees are even going to the intranet, and once they get there, they're not spending very much time on any of our communications content. But when you look at our app, we've got, 70, 80% of our employees who are going to that app, and once they go there, they are spending all kinds of time with that content. So the app is meeting them where they are. They're able to look at this sort of when they want to without the complexity of a laptop or VPN if they're remote, all those types of things. And so I was able to show him that it's much more valuable for us to push this over the app than it is to singularly push this onto the intranet. And without any kind of data, that would have just been my gut feeling. And, no CEO is going to make a decision necessarily based on a gut feeling. So it was a great way for me to define those two things and show the value. All right, so we're coming into the home stretch here. These will go by fairly quickly, so don't worry, you'll have time for some questions at the end. So great, this has been fantastic. I'm going to hang up, and what do I do now? So don't fear, because everybody thinks that success looks like this straight line on the left. It does not. It looks like that messy line on the right. You're going to keep doing some of the things you're doing. It's going to feel messy. You're going to start trying to dabble in creating a strategy, and that's great. None of that is going to be fixed by, Thursday of next week. So don't think that, oh gosh, if I want to have success, my line needs to look like what's on the left. Nobody's line in your whole company looks like that. So you got to keep sort of chugging through all of those sort of squiggly lines and that spaghetti bowl of mess there in an effort to drive success. And by the way, that's what's exciting and interesting. If it was just a straight line and you came in there and, accomplished everything immediately, what's the challenge in that? It's the complexity, I think, that makes it interesting. So don't shun the spaghetti part in favor of the straight line part. It's just as valuable to realize that that's part of the process that you have to go through. This next thing sort of speaks to courage. You know more about what you know about than they do. Even if you've only spent 2 weeks in the corporate communications function, that's 2 weeks more than probably 99.9% of the people in your organization, including all of the senior leaders. So you know more about what you know about than they do. That should give you a super level of confidence, even more so when you're backing what you know about with data. So don't be afraid when you're in a meeting, when people say, oh, we ought to do it this way, and you know that's not the right thing to do. You've even seen that happen before, and it doesn't work. Be comfortable in the fact that you know more about what you know about than they do. And, approach those conversations that way. They are relying on you for that counsel. They need that type of trusted advice from you. And so don't be reticent, and sort of shy about saying that, because you do know more, and they want you to know more. That's why you're there. We talked about this earlier. I can't stress this enough. Your seat at the table is earned with data. If you don't have data that's backing up what you're doing, and it could be any kind of data, stuff that you are doing yourself, stuff that you're getting from the rest of the organization, even best practices from outside of the organization, from content that's available on the SocialChorus site, for example. If you don't have data, then you are essentially running an arts and crafts department, and they're going to continue to come to you with arts and crafts requests. So if you want to be a strategic partner, be a strategic partner, and everything you do is tied to strategy, business strategy, communication strategy, and data. That will get you out of the arts and crafts one-off requests that we all sort of, cringe when we get. And I know you can do this. I've got a lot of confidence in you because this last thing is true. You were able to believe in Santa Claus for like 8 years. You can certainly believe in yourself for like 5 minutes to get this up and going, to think about things a little bit differently, to not be constrained by the what is in your organization that we all have to deal with. It's the what if that matters. What if we did this differently? What if we looked at this differently? What if we tracked this data a little bit differently? All of that is what's valuable. You can do it. You've proven that you can do it. You believed in Santa Claus. You can believe in yourself. And so part of getting to that comfort level and the courage level that it's going to take to think about comms differently is just believing in yourself. Clearly, you can do that. So there's no reason why you can't do that within this context as well. Chuck, what about those extra questions?
My son, my son is 10, still a Santa Claus believer. I am 42 and still a Santa Claus believer. So I like this message of communicators, believing in yourself, having a little, say, backbone, maybe to your instincts, to what the data is telling you, to not fold when you get challenged, because as you said, you're hired for that reason. You're there to do that job. You would never question an engineer. You would never question a safety professional for those same very reasons. One question I did have for you when you mentioned the Arts and Crafts Committee, or Arts and Crafts Department, I've often referred to that as the Make It Pretty Committee. What would you say, though, to the communicators who do like that part of the job, who do like some of the arts and crafts component? Is that all bad?
Oh, no, not at all, because a lot of that arts and crafts stuff falls into employee experience. And if you're going to have a holiday party at your location and you need signage and somebody needs to plan the party, yes, by all means, we want to be involved in that. That helps improve the employee experience, but it needs to be a part of somewhere in your strategy that says employee experience matters. And so as a result, we're having a holiday party, and our holiday party needs to feel like this. And so then what you're doing is aligned to, a business objective, and it doesn't just feel like a one-off thing. So that's not to say don't do the arts and crafts, don't do the fun stuff, don't have fun. Of course you have to. That's an important part of our roles, because we are creative and we are fun people, and we do want employees to have that kind of great experience. But it needs to be in service of a larger sort of business goal. And employee experience and making people feel good about working there is certainly an important business goal.
And we've got a couple other questions we want to get answered. This is really just a little more depth on things you talked about earlier, Jason, so a chance for you to go deeper into these topics. Heather Young has a question here. First a statement and then a question. She's like, it's hard to take credit for outcomes because it's hard to measure the direct impact. What is the impact comms had versus something else that happened in an organization? So she's curious, what kind of measurement or evaluation can help determine, if comms isn't solely responsible for that impact or that change, how do we begin evaluating how much of an impact through that evaluation and measurement did we impact that change?
Right. So let's go back to our retail organization analogy. So the goal is 20% increase in sales in the Southeast region. You do a lot of communications to the retail employees about what that means and how to do that. What you found, though, is that there's no sales training that's going on. So maybe we need a sales training initiative, and you kind of recommend that to HR. Or you find out that, during that period, we're going to run a 2-for-1 sale every other Thursday. So that by itself is going to drive a lot of those sales increases. But none of those things by themselves are necessarily going to get you the organization, to the goal that they're looking for. It's a combination of all of those things. So, yeah, they're going to come in and run a sale, and that's going to juice the numbers. Yeah, they're going to come in with a training initiative that's going to help people be better at selling. But if you're not communicating to your employees about any of those things, then all of those things are going to fall flat. So if there's a 20% increase, can you say, well, with comms, we were able to get 7 of that 20? I don't think so. Any more so than for your friends on the media relations side when they send out a press release that say, hey, hammers are on sale at Home Depot. I don't know that anybody at Home Depot bought a hammer because they saw that press release. I know they won't buy a hammer necessarily if I don't send out a press release. Same thing here. I don't know that it's a 7% comms sort of piece within that 20% lift that we got. I don't know how to quantify that. And sometimes the best way to show return on investment is to show return on non-investment. So if we hadn't done anything at all, what would that look like? I think that's sometimes kind of a way to back into it. People implicitly are looking for sort of ROI on stuff, but it's just as important to think about what would the return be if we hadn't invested anything at all. And then that's where you pull out your outputs and how many people did attended meetings or attended the training. Then you can sort of tie exactly what what the comms role was in trying to get to that lift. I had an old boss who just used to rail against ROI, particularly when it came to communications, because so much of what we do feels kind of fuzzy. It's how you're making people feel and how they act and react, and that's very hard to measure without some very specific, psychological type things within the organization. And so he would always say, I don't know what the ROI is for me putting on my pants every day. I just know that everybody appreciates it when I do it. Same thing here. We can't always measure the exact ROI of all the comms things that we do, but we know that if we don't do it, none of those things are going to be successful at all. So usually it's a combination of the operational things and the comm support to help make this happen.
Well, and I would say, Jason, the ROI for your boss was probably avoiding an arrest in some of your own company's PR or putting on his pants every day for work. But my advice to you, Heather, around this is that somebody will gladly take credit for it. And this, I'm not saying to be belligerent about taking credit, but certainly take credit where credit is due. And if comms had an impact on it, be very detailed and direct in the fact that your communication efforts had that impact, and stand up for it, showing data, showing the outcomes as being a part of it, because in isolation it would not have happened. But certainly a great question. We do have a few more here. Jason, the next one is from Kristen Hancock, our friend up in America's Hat. up there in Canada. She has a question here. Do you have one key business partner, such as marketing or HR, when you look at these data reports, or do you rely on everyone? So I guess it's the chance to maybe go a little bit deeper on this is, where should communicators begin looking for these partners in the business to help them find these data points that are out there that can truly change the business?
Well, certainly HR is an important one, probably the most important one. I would say also the IT function is an important one. A lot of times they own the infrastructure and the backbone. They're tracking a lot of things, all of which is helpful. They may show that we don't get a whole lot of people who VPN to our network when they're away from the office because our VPN process is a little bit of a hassle. That's a great thing to know, because when you're trying to send out communications to people who primarily need to VPN, like they might be remote salespeople, for example, just know that you're going to have a hard time reaching them just because it's hard to get through the VPN process. And so that's an opportunity for you to make a business recommendation around improving the VPN process, even though that's not part of comms. That doesn't really have anything to do with comms. But it would make your comms more valuable and more successful if you help them improve that VPN process. So I think any of the functions around the business who are, tracking and measuring whatever it is that they deem are their KPIs, each one of them has sort of a dashboard, and everything they're tracking has some sort of communications component to it. And all of it, I think, is incredibly insightful, not just about comms, but about how the business is operating. And so, we should be as comfortable looking at all of those numbers as we are at looking at the comm stuff, because that's what all the senior leaders are looking at all day long, every single day. The more we know about that business, the more valuable we are as a business partner and not just a comms partner.
Well, and also I would say here, definitely recommend looking at who can become your allies down the road. So who people can help you facilitate your own efforts. We do have a few more questions coming in. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. So I always recommend reaching out. Jason's a great connection and follow on LinkedIn. So definitely reach out to Jason there. You're improving your game a little bit on Twitter, Jason. So maybe you can help him out by giving him a follow on Twitter. But definitely a great follow on LinkedIn. We just have a few more slides to go through here. Get off the Santa Claus one. So from the SocialChorus side, we believe every worker matters. We believe whether you're the CEO, whether you're somebody in the main line, middle management, whoever it is, we want everybody to have access to the same information, because we know when workers feel informed, aligned, and supported, every organization is then made better. A little bit about us, SocialChorus, a lot of us think of it as an app company, but really it's about a single point of publishing, being able to publish to multiple channels from one platform, whether it be an app, whether it be a web, whether it be an intranet site, as Jason talked about, but being that one single point, that one CMS for all employees to reach out to. We work with a lot of great companies from all over the world. These are just a sampling of those that we get to be a part of. We do have some upcoming webinars. Go check those out on the website. Some great resources there. And then Jason, again, thank you so much for doing this, taking an hour out of your day and even prep time coming in to be a part of this webinar. Your expertise is always appreciated. Though we should have concluded with some sort of Thelma and Louise image here and us driving off the cliff. Again, all of you out there, keep fighting the good fight. What we do every day as communicators is very important to organizations. Please connect with Jason. Please connect with myself. Any questions, both of us are always happy to answer them. We both bring unique experiences from the comms world and also often have very unfiltered responses based on this. So again, thank you, Jason, for your time and effort and thoughts today.
Thanks, everybody. And I know, Chuck mentioned that I took an hour out of my day. So did everybody else. And so I hope this has been valuable. I hope this has been insightful. If it sparked other questions, you can call or email or hit me up on social media as you need to. I'm glad to help you sort through whatever your challenge might be. And of course, the clock is never running for stuff like that. I'm just glad to be helpful. So thank you again for the opportunity to share this insight.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.